Okay, so you call super.paint component, and it calls that so-called UI delegate or assistant, and it redraws the background so that it essentially wipes out whatever was drawn on the window. And we'll experiment with what happens if you forget to call super.paint component. But basically, it erases the existing window. So it erases whatever was there and gives you a new clean canvas to work on. And then the final thing you need to be careful about in Paint component is that you should restore the graphics object to its original state before you exit. Okay, and the reason is that after Paint component is called, the Java virtual machine calls a couple other methods. One to draw borders around your JPanel, and one to draw any children, which are any widgets that should be put in a JPanel. If you remember, JPanel is a container object, so you might have also decided to put some widgets in this JPanel. And if you don't restore the graphics object to its original state, then it's going to pass that modified graphics object to paint borders, and the borders will probably not be drawn in the way you expect. So for example, if you change the fill color to red, then the borders end up getting drawn in red rather than in black. And again, in the video lecture, I talked about how you handle that. There's some methods where you can create a copy of the graphics object and then use that copy of the graphics object, modify its state. Then at the end, you call dispose on that copy, and it prepares it for garbage collection. Again, watch the video lecture. I don't want to go into the same or regurgitate the details that I already had in the video lecture about it, but it tells you how to do that. I expect you to do that in homework 8. Okay, so that's essentially what happens. The first step, you call paint component, you create a copy of the graphics object, you do your painting, and then at the end you restore the graphics object to its original state. Okay, and it is okay, as I said, to have paint component call functions. In fact, we talked about sprites in the video lecture and how you can call the, in effect, draw function for a sprite, passing it the graphics object, and it will draw the appropriate sprite to the screen. So again, watch the video lecture. It gives you some information about that. Okay, then the other important thing with JPanels is the get preferred size function. Again, it's public. It returns actually a dimension object. So typically what you do here is you do some computations to determine what your desired size is. Okay, and let's say that you calculate some width and height. And then once you've done that, you return a dimension object. With that width and height. And the layout managers will use this information to provide you with an initial size. Okay, so when you call pack the layout manager will typically give you exactly this preferred size. That's how you'll show up on the screen. Now, sometimes you don't really care what your preferred size is, so you could, in that case, set it equal to whatever your maximum size is. You might say return maximum, and there's ways to basically say infinity. And that would say it would leave the layout manager with a bit of a conundrum, but I've never really done that. I typically always return some initial dimensions that I want. Okay. And then there's get minimum size and get maximum size, which you are free to provide or not provide. And in the homework assignment, I don't require it. But minimum size tells the layout manager the minimum size at which you feel you can display yourself. And get maximum size says this is the maximum size at which I feel I can display myself. Now, the layout manager is free to ignore this. So, for example, when you have a border layout, okay, and it has these regions, and let's say you're put in the north, and you say that your desired maximum size, maybe for get maximum size, let's say you return something like, say 100 for the width and 20 for the height. Well, the border layout manager will respect your desire never to be rendered in something at a height greater than 20 pixels, but it will ignore your desire never to be displayed in an area greater than 100 pixels. If the user makes this window be 200 pixels wide, it will set your size, your width, to be 200 pixels no matter what you want. It's against your wishes, but it will ignore it. So these are merely suggestions to the layout manager. They are not, you can't guarantee that you will never be displayed in an area less than your minimum size or in an area greater than your maximum size. Okay, grid layout manager ignores both of them, except when it's laying you out for the first time. Okay, remember, grid layout manager gives calculates the biggest width and height for over all the components, and then gives every component that width and height. So layout managers may or may not respect your wishes in this matter. Okay, so questions about that? Okay, in that case, what I want you to do is get into your laptops, and if you don't, then you're just going to have to follow along or watch a neighbor. But what we're going to do ultimately is create, not this application, we're going to create an application that allows you to draw or to move a line that's anchored in the middle. And you might recognize this as something you could do with a gauge. Okay? Now we're letting you spin it 360 degrees. Also, we're going to make you be within a certain threshold. So if I click here, nothing happens. If I click up here, nothing happens. But if I'm right near the point, it moves. So I have to be within some predetermined distance of the endpoint before it will actually move. So we're going to do this in steps. Okay? So the first step I'm going to have you do is I'm just going to have you draw a line that goes from the middle of the canvas to the upper left-hand corner. So to do that, you're going to have to do the following things, which I'm about to turn you loose on. You're going to obviously, you're going to have to somehow create a J-frame. Okay, you're going to have to create a JPanel class with a paint component method. And a get preferred size method based on what I just told you. And your paint component class must draw a line. So that's going to be, there's a draw line method from the center of the J panel to the upper left-hand corner. Okay, and a couple things you might be helpful. JPanel has get width and get height commands so that you can easily figure out what the center is by getting the width and height and dividing by 2. And you also need to remember that the y-axis goes from the upper left-hand corner. So that's kind of a funny thing about graphics, but if you have a window, 0 for the y-axis is actually at the upper left, not the lower left as you're used to from your math classes. So you need to get used to that when you're drawing objects. Okay, so I would, personally, what I did was I started this by going to the website where they did the notes for today. So go to today's lecture notes, go to custom painting, okay, and if you go to the first page, they have some code that you can copy and paste, and that's a good start. Actually, that's not a really good start. Actually, the next one is even better. So the next one actually has the panel. So I would take the code from the second one, which is step2.html, and there they're creating for you the initial J-frame, the initial J-panel, and now you can modify that to create that line. So I'm going to give you about 15 minutes to do that. Feel free to work with a neighbor on it. Feel free to ask me questions about it. And in about 15 minutes, we will go back over the solution.
Yeah, and I didn't put like the stuff inside here with the and everything, obviously, but I just did like a simple one. But I keep getting this. Error cannot find simple change this now. They can't find it with class.
Okay, so do is go to Google change this.
When I did action this time, just like your code.
It's from Java.org.
Okay. So, so what is it to even put, I mean, I've been doing this recently, but with the dot star, shouldn't
You don't need, it doesn't, it's just a really good subdirectory. And they includes the files that directory. So event is a subdirectory, therefore it doesn't work. It's just the way Java's defined.
Okay, so that change listener, I can just put in right here the Q day. I don't have to make a separate class for it, so it goes right there. And then the buttons are also, the sliders listening to the buttons.
So, well, the slider though is, okay, sure, the buttons will set the value of the slider, but the change listener is actually for when you move the slider. So when you move it, it will generate a change event. So the change listener is all about catching times when the slider is in. And when one of the buttons changes the value, they'll simply call the sliders set value method. Slider will automatically take its values.
Okay. So it's not like the sliders listening to the buttons.
No. And then once you get to the gate, things will change a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's got a package, just check, because it packages anything. When you called it, you forgot to put painting on. You have to fully qualify the name. Which you can abbreviate CP if you want to save yourself time. So just, if you copy that code, it's in a package called Painting, so take that into account. I actually just deleted the package because I didn't want to mess with it.
So this is maybe 250. That's going to be 100.
It's not centered anymore.
I have to go as soon as you resize the window.
Yeah. So you're going to get, you're close. You have to use the J panel's get width and get height methods to get
Can't
the
you just get the width, get the height up by 2?
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you're saying.
Yeah. Except watch what happens.
Oh, you get him error?
You're going to get a compile error. I'm waiting for someone to ask the question.
It's like the old hard coding.
Yeah, don't go hard coding the dimensions, because if someone resizes the window, it's supposed to still be centered. That may create a little bit of a problem, you will find. You have to use get width and get height in order to make sure that you stay centered if the user resizes the window. J panel. You want to get the width and height from the J panel. The graphics object doesn't have a width or height. Okay, one clever person found they could essentially modify one line of code. So this isn't, if you copy the code there, this isn't like a huge exercise. Get the compiler message.
No, still I'm trying to find how to get the J panel.
No. J panel has. The J panel has a get width and get height method that
It's not
returns
the
its
J
width
panel.
and
Yeah.
height.
This one is
You don't
so
have
even
to
if
call it
anybody
it's called get width and get height on that J panel.
just choose it.
Yes. You can get it to work it out.
You can amend it. So you can do something after this.
Or else that. You separated the classes, that's what it is. Okay. There's a,
You need to
so that's one way to get rid of not the compile error. Okay, that's good then. No one's out there. Yeah, right now. We'll talk about that rest of the month.
Okay, try to print out these results and see what you get. Maybe that'll be a little bit. Try to print out.
I don't have an error. Actually, I have an error, but it's
Yes. Yes. So that's sauce. Actually, set visible.
So it has to use print or use print.
Anyone sees a error message with the word static in it, I'm happy to help. If you're not seeing it, then that's good too.
has to calculate it once. So you really have to move this code because you want that calculation has to be done every time right there. You're only doing that calculation very first. Actually, actually, you just need to call super paint before you do any drawing. So super paint inspiration. Everyone's doing it. I know what's going on. So you put two different classes in one file. Right. Yeah. So I see what's going on. I did something a little different. That's caused an issue. Okay, so let's have a look-see at what we need to do. It turns out that as long as you use the code that was in step 2, there's only one line you have to change. It's that line right there. Actually, it'd be helpful if you changed the comment so that it says draw a line rather than draw a text. So I'll modify that to say 2 lines that you should modify. Now, in order to draw the line, you can't just say 125, 100, because if you resize the screen, it won't, or resize the window, it won't stay centered. So you have to use the get width and get height methods. So here's my code right there. Okay, g.drawLine, this.getWidth, you don't need the this. GetWidth is fine because you are calling it on the J panel. And then 0, 0 because you're going to the upper left-hand corner, and Y is 0 if you want it to go to the upper left-hand corner. Okay. Now, many of you put 2 classes in the wrong in one file, which technically you're not supposed to do. Okay, so to fix that little problem in my code, I actually made my panel be a nested class. Okay, so I actually put my panel inside of the outer class. And that causes a problem which you may occasionally experience, so I want to show you what problem it causes. So I'm going to comment out the constructor for a moment. So if you make the panel a inner class, which is the only, quote, legitimate way to put 2 classes in one file, you get a nasty little error message that says, non-static method create and show GUI cannot be referenced, just a second, from a, is that what I wanted? That wasn't what I wanted, just a moment. Create and show GUI is actually supposed to be created. So I make it static. I get a very unusual error message. In Java 30 error, non-static variable this cannot be referenced from a static context. So what seems strange about this error message based on this statement? there's no this. Okay, this is a very weird error message. It's a very poor error message from Java, which is why I'm bringing it up so that you know if you run into this problem in the future, what's going on. It's again why nested classes can be and static stuff can be dangerous. Okay, so what the demo did, they made create and show GUI be a static method. And then they called it. And the reason they did it that way is they didn't want to actually create an instance of in class. They just wanted to call this method and treat it like main. Okay? Well, what I did was I created an inner class called myPanel, and inside create and show, I tried to create a new instance of myPanel, and in paint component, I tried to access this. And that is what it's complaining about. So line 30, the error at line 30 actually is complaining about something that I did at line 49. Okay, and the problem is that I am creating an instance of a nested class. Okay, but I'm doing that from within a static method. Okay, so create and show GUI is static, so there is no actual outer class. There's no instance of an outer class, and therefore when I try to create an instance of myPanel, the compiler doesn't like it because there is no outer class instance to associate it with. So this is yet another pitfall of using static methods in Java, is that you can't do anything with inner classes because there's no outer instance to associate the inner instance with. So I had to fiddle around. First of all, I had to get rid of the static, and I had to go back to using my idiom of calling the constructor. Okay, so static just always causes you problems, and they're getting away with it because, and you were getting away with it because you were putting two classes that were separate into the same file, but that's not really copacetic. Okay, you really should have taken that second file and put it in a separate class. And because you're only creating one instance of that class, it really probably should have been an inner class, and all kinds of issues. So at any rate, none of you ran into it, so that was fine, but I did. Okay, let's take a look at what happens if you forget to put the super.paint component in there, because I just told you to do it, and I kind of passingly said, well, it erases the window and gives you a clean canvas on which to draw. Okay? So I don't think it may be an issue just yet, but I'm going to comment it out just to see. It's certainly going to be an issue later. Okay, it's not an issue yet. It will become an issue later, so I'll raise it later when it's an issue. Okay, so here's what I want you to do next. Right now, you can't move it. Okay, what I want you to do next is set it up. Which one am I running? Wrong one. I want you to set it up so that wherever you click and then drag, the line follows it. So for this particular time, it doesn't have to be near the tip of the line. It just is wherever you click down, it will jump there, and then as you drag, it will stay connected to the mouse. Okay? So, you're going to have to do some additional stuff. And now you may want to look at the next demo, but before we do that, I'll tell you what you need to do. So you're going to need to create a couple listeners. Need to create a mouse listener, and as described in the both in the notes and in the video lecture, you really should create a mouse adapter for that. And you're going to override the mouse pressed and mouse released buttons. And you'll have to add that as a mouse listener, so you'll add it. This will be added as a mouse listener. And mouse pressed will obviously get the coordinates of the mouse, as will mouse released. And then you'll also have a mouse motion adapter. And there you will implement the mouse dragged method. So mouse dragged is what happens when you have the mouse down and you drag with it, or the mouse pressed and you dragged, and you will add it as a mouse motion listener. And again, you'll need to grab the mouse coordinates from the event. So each of these three methods is passed a mouse event object, and you can get at the X and Y coordinates using the get X and get Y. So you'll have to modify your paint component. You'll have to probably add some instance variables that record the new endpoint for the line so that when you get into paint component, you can draw it. Now, the other thing you'll need to do, so these three methods, mouse pressed, mouse released, and mouse drag, they need to save the mouse coordinates. And then they need to call a method called repaint. So you'll remember that I said that the virtual machine calls paint component at the appropriate time. The way it does that is you notify it that the canvas is changed by calling repaint. And the virtual machine queues a paint event on the event queue. Once all pending events are cleared and processed, the paint event is executed and it calls your paint component method. Do not call paint component from any of these methods. That will potentially break things. Instead, call repaint, and repaint will ensure that eventually paint component gets called at the appropriate time. Now again, you don't have to go and write all of this code from scratch because they were doing a demo where they were creating a rectangle that you could move. So if you go to step 3, they have a lot of this stuff already written for you. In particular, they have these mouse adapter and please don't use a mouse. You really should use a mouse motion adapter here. But if you want, you can use a mouse adapter. It's okay. At any rate, you can take again and copy their code from step 3, but now you're going to have to do some modifications because you're trying to move a line, not a square. So again, I'm going to give you about 10 minutes to 12:15 on this, then we'll talk about it. Yes? Okay, let me go and have a look.
know, he goes for 50, he's not here for it. It's not, then he'll be walking here.
No, that's not what it is. Like it was making super, super.
I don't know how you do it. Oh, no. So what I did is I have all of my files stored I created a server all the uploads
I think we're back on bad.
Yeah.
The other one is, that's all on my Oh,
To give us that.
I always get called.
so here's
See what they extend.
Because there is a default.
They want to keep it.
Yes. No, I get that off. Using old code, that old code. Oh, no, I mean, I wrote mine from scratch. But somehow I think there's a sense because we look for this to be 250. That's how I figured. I was getting it. I don't know. But at any rate,
They're actually
I work with this. Yep. Excellent. Really, you should keep passing it.
I'm saying whatever the new phones coded it for the mouse.
Yeah, you should, but that's a little advanced. For this class. So repaint, normally when you give it this stuff, this is what's called a bounding box. It's saying that the only part of the screen that you want to redraw is that part. So it's trying to narrow. So usually the paint component erases the entire J panel, but when you put all repaint these smaller bounding box, it's called a bounding box, it will only clear the bounding box. And that makes the paint procedure more efficient because, yes, unfortunately, we don't have time to really get into drawing algorithms and all the things that we can do to explain that. So in this class, I just suggest you just call repaint without any parameters and let it blank the entire canvas. Okay.
So
The
still keeping this one.
no, well, that's move square.
Right.
You really should have written something instead of calling move square. You should have something like move line. And all you're doing is saving. Yeah, you're saving square x and square y.
And then if you just call repaint, it would have been good enough. Just like, yeah, that will repaint at the end. So if you're really trying to be efficient, you really only need to erase the area where the line used to be and the area where the line is going to be. So the point in the demo was that they were trying to just erase where it used to be and where the square now is, so that you'd only be
Right. Now we see the line. Now we have to know where the line is.
where the line was.
Are we doing that here too?
I just want to repaint. It just
Wipes
wipes
the whole
the whole screen out and then draws a new
which is
line
not
on it.
efficient.
Which isn't efficient, but because I don't want you to have to start worrying about, if you get the bounding box even wrong by a pixel or two, you'll start getting visual artifacts because it won't erase all of the old. Yes, and that's why the offset was good. It just gets complicated, and this isn't a graphical user interface class, so I don't want to overlay burden. Okay, so let's talk about how to make that line move. Okay, so what I did was I declared two new instance variables to keep track of the endpoint of the line. So one endpoint will always be centered in the middle of the window, and then the initial coordinates of the other endpoint is at 0, 0, and as the user drags the mouse around, I'm going to update these two instance variables. And you can see I wrote my mouse adapter declaring these two methods. Now, if you didn't watch the video lecture for today, this mouse listener is an interface. It defines a whole bunch of methods, I think like 8 of them. 7, 8, 9 methods. And if you're going to create an instance of a mouse listener, you would have to define method bodies for all 8 or 9 methods, even though you only care about these two. So that gets to be tedious to write null method bodies for a whole bunch of methods you don't care about. So Java's solution was to create these classes that are called adapter classes that implement the corresponding listener interface, and they provide null method bodies for all of the methods defined by this interface. And then you only have to provide method bodies for the methods you want to override. So in this case, the only two we care about are mouse pressed and mouse released. And I wrote a function called update line, just like they wrote a function called move square. And I'm simply passing update line the x and y coordinates from the mouse event. And the same thing is true for the mouse dragged. I actually overrode the mouse motion adapter and added a mouse motion listener. And in this case, the only method I care about is mouse dragged. And again, all I care about is updating the line's coordinates. If we go and look at my update line, it's pretty simple. I simply set end x equal to x, and y equal to y, and I call repaint. Now, the demo was more sophisticated. It was passing parameters to repaint. Okay, my way of doing things is less efficient. It tells paint component to clear the entire window or J panel and then redraw it. In the demo, they were calling repaint a couple times, and they were giving it what's called a bounding box. And that bounding box was the smallest bounding box that was enclosing the old square and the new square. So if you pass a bounding box to repaint, then super dot paint component will only erase the portion of the screen that was associated with the old and new regions. Now, if you call repaint multiple times like it did, it actually does a union of those regions. But the idea is you don't end up clearing the entire screen, but only a fraction of the screen, and that's more efficient. Now, for this class, I'm not going to worry about efficiency. This isn't a GUI class. If this were in GUIs, I would be going through some sophisticated drawing algorithms that would allow you to incrementally redraw the screen. But I don't care about that in this class, so it's fine if you just call repaint once at the end and you give it no parameters. And then the screen, the J panel will get blanked, and then you'll redraw whatever you need on top of it. If you try to provide a bounding box here and you're off by even a couple pixels, you will start seeing visual artifacts on the display because a portion of the line might not get erased. Okay, and I really don't want you to have to worry about that in homework 8. You have enough to worry about as it is. Okay, so down in paint component, my only modification was that instead of drawing to 0, 0, I now drew to end X and end Y. So it's pretty simple code. Okay, and I will actually try to put it on Piazza so that you can take a look at it. Now, this time I am going to comment out super.paint component to show you what happens if you forget to call it. Wait, that shouldn't have happened. That's really annoying. Not sure why. I commented out. Compile it. Run it. Okay, well, I'm not sure why it's working. Normally, if you leave out super.paint component, it doesn't erase the background. And what would happen is I'd get ghosting, where I would see every previous instance of the line showing up. For some reason, which I don't understand, it's erasing it despite my not calling super.paint component, and that should not be happening. And in fact, in the past when I did it, it ghosted.
It is doing it.
Okay. Okay, so it's ghosting for you all. I'm not sure why it's not ghosting for me. But if you forget super.paint component, you will probably see ghosting. We call it ghosting. It's the failure to erase your old canvas before you repaint the new one. Okay, so I'm glad at least it's not working properly for everyone else. Okay, here's the last thing that I did, and you don't have time to do it. So I'm just going to quickly show it to you and I'll post it. I want it to also not select the mouse if it was not within some distance of the endpoint. So I didn't want to unconditionally move the line, so I added another variable called moving, which I set to false. And in mouse pressed, what I did was I calculated the distance of X and Y from the current endpoint of the line. So this is a formula which you should be somewhat familiar with that calculates the distance between 2 points. So I'm calculating the distance between the mouse point and the current endpoint of the line. So that's all that this equation does. And if that distance or the length of that segment is less than 10, then I'm willing to move it. So I set moving equal true, and I call update line. And then you can see that in mouse released, I check moving and I only update the line if I'm moving and I set moving to false. In mouse drag, I check to see if the moving flag is true because I only want to move the line if this flag is true. So you need to do that in homework 8 with the gauge because you only are supposed to move the needle if the cursor is within a certain distance of the line. The other thing, just quickly, and I'll let you go, you'll notice all these import statements up there. You'll have to be careful to make the right imports because these classes you're using are scattered across multiple packages in Java. So if you find that a certain class is undefined, my recommendation is you Google it in the API docs and find out what package it belongs to and then add an appropriate import statement for that class. So you will have to have a bunch of import statements at the top of your files for homework 8. Okay? I will see you Tuesday when we will start in with Python.